All right. What's up, people? So, right now I want to do something that I don't usually do, which is talk seriously about a complicated, contemporary current affair. I usually don't pay that much attention, to be perfectly honest, to everyday current affairs because a lot of it is noise, and until the dust settles after a few weeks or whatever, you often really don't know what the hell is going on. So I often find it's not worth it to dip into hot topics right when they're fresh because there's so much confusion. And there's also just so much kind of moral panic around everything nowadays. So to be honest, I think it's usually not worth commenting directly on things that are happening in the moment. But I'm a lot in the spirit of experimentation recently. So I thought, how about I try to actually grok something that's fresh in the news and see if I can make sense out of it in a useful and simple way that I could share with people. Sort of a challenge to myself. So I started reading up on the tax bill, and I'm not going to give you some sort of really sexy, pithy, clickbaity type of media piece here where I kind of give you some really hard-hitting lefty template or some sort of anti-lefty template either. I'm going to basically just try to condense for you as simply as possible my honest overall sense of how to read this bill. That might sound kind of boring, but I actually think that, in today's media environment, there's so much kind of nonsense and moral freaking out that actually really short, concise, and honest efforts to just say what something really truly is might actually be, strangely exciting to try and do, actually, personally. I hope you agree, but we'll find out. So, I'm not a tax expert or anything, but, as a political scientist, I like to think I know enough about this stuff to make a decent attempt at explaining these things. I'll give you some full disclosure that, I spent about 3 hours last night reading about this, I think, and probably 1 hour today, reading across the lefty websites and the right-wing websites. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you how it looks to me. Okay, I could be wrong about some things. I could be unsure about some things. I'll try to flag those when they pop up. I think like all healthy political discourse should be like a conversation. So everyone should do their best to say what they see. But then, update it as they go with other people. So all of those caveats should apply. I know these are not very sexy caveats, but this is like the reality of trying to be frank and clear, right? So a few starting points. One reason why the tax bill is so complicated and kind of confusing is that it expires in 2027, at which point the terms will change. And so a lot of the calculations about its effects that you might be seeing are kind of actually referring to different points in time. So that's one reason why it can be really confusing. Some people say, oh, group so-and-so is going to be seeing a tax hike. And another outlet says group XYZ is going to see a tax increase, cut or whatever. Part of that is because they might be talking about different time periods. So that's why, you really have to kind of pull your hair out trying to make sense out of this stuff, which is understandably why so few people do it, right? It's also complicated, and this is going to have to remain uncertain. Anything anyone is saying about the tax bill has to be put in pretty wide confidence intervals because the House and the Senate versions differ. So, like, how exactly it's going to break down is we don't know exactly. The House and the Senate versions are going to, some sort of halfway point is going to have to be found, all right? So, yeah. Those are all just things to keep in mind. But having said that, having looked over everything I could, here are a few things that jump out at me. The first is that, I think that Trump is clearly a bit of a maniac. I'm not a big fan of him, personally, but I'm just sharing my subjective biases. And I generally think that most politicians are generally, very deceptive, disingenuous creatures who are complicit with a totally corrupt system, and they're all more or less just trying to basically tell people whatever suits their interests and serve their own constituencies. Okay, so taking that kind of for granted, given that, yeah, I think this is basically a massive gift to the wealthy. That is true, and to corporations. That is true. And you can have all kinds of debates about what the effects of that will be. I'm not going to really get into that here because it's very contentious and not too much to say in a short stream such as this one. But another thing, so that you gotta say that for sure, that this is by all counts what a lot of people are saying it is, which is for the most part it is in large part a massive gift to the wealthy and to corporations, which I'm personally not a big fan of, but whatever, we can kind of leave that where it is. What is also undeniably happening, though, as far as I can tell, is that there is a genuine, legit, like serious moral panic on the left. The way that people are talking about this is as if it's like, the end of the world is beginning right now. That is very hard for me to find justification for in the stuff that I was reading and trying to understand this bill. So it seems to me there's definitely a bona fide freak out going on with lots of misleading facts or misleading statements and just completely outsized kind of moral panic, basically, on the left. That seems undeniably true also. So, okay, so that's my kind of overarching thesis, but let me break down some of the key bullet points that I think are most important about the tax bill from the most impartial perspective I can kind of muster. Well, one is, so let's start with the bad. I've already said it's basically a gift for the wealthy and corporations, but another thing is that in 2027, the individual tax cuts will expire. So because of that, it looks like, from what I've been able to find, many working and middle-class people will see slight tax hikes in 2027 relative to what they had before. So that is problematic. But what's interesting about that is that in some sense, if that's a problem and you think that that's bad because you're looking at the tax cuts that might occur for people in 2027, you're kind of implicitly saying that the tax cuts that will take effect from now until 2027 are good in some sense. So, if you're lamenting that the individual tax cuts will expire in 2027 and you're holding that up as one of the reasons why this bill is so evil, well, then you're kind of implicitly saying that the tax cuts they introduce before then are good. It seems kind of implied. Okay, so you can have, strong opinions about the tax cuts expiring being a bad thing, but it would seem to be in that case you would need to basically say that you want to continue these sets of tax cuts further than Trump is basically, or, the tax plan, whatever, the Republicans are basically able to legislate it at this point. So there's some dubious kind of contradictory logic there if you find the expiration of the tax cuts bad. Honestly, one of the things that I thought was kind of worst about this bill and sketchiest is the fact that it also has provisions to open up drilling in the Arctic, in the wildlife reserves. That's like super sketchy and deceptive and secretive. Like, why is that even in a tax bill? I think that's I think that's pretty irresponsible and loathsome personally. But that's just how it falls for me. So those are the bad things, it seems to me, that it is in fact a gift to the wealthy and corporations. But here's something to keep in mind, though. A lot of people on the left are saying that this is going to be a tax hike for middle class families and working families. And even some poor people. You hear that kind of floated by, that this is going to like ravage poor people. Well, you can definitely argue this is not good for like a democracy, because it's unfair perhaps to give more money back to the wealthy. You can argue that for sure. That's totally reasonable, and I tend to be sympathetic to that. But there's no evidence, like this is not going to be like literally taking money from many poor working or middle class people. Some people will see taxes increase to some degree. But on the whole, especially until 2027, from now to 2027, most people will see tax cuts from this. So most people are going to have more cash. And most middle-class people, most working people are generally supportive of middle-class tax cuts. Okay? the public opinion towards this bill is not favorable, but towards the idea of more people, more poor and working people getting more tax cuts, that is widely supported, generally seen as a good thing. So until 2027, at least, that is going to happen for most people. It's going to happen more for wealthy people. Yes, and you can argue that's unfair, but this is not going to be like actually taking money from very many poor working class or middle class people. So, but a lot of Democratic politicians were actually disseminating this statement, which the Washington Post fact checked and found to be wrong and factually incorrect and false, deceptive, that a large number of middle class families would be seeing tax hikes. That was a comment spread by Democratic politicians and then, propagated through lefty social media. And then that's flat out false. Okay. So that's like super important to understand. The more sophisticated critics who talk about individuals getting their tax cuts, middle class individuals getting their tax cuts, are citing what's going to happen in 2027. But in that case, it seems to me, wouldn't you basically just want to argue that the tax cuts should be extended, which would have you in the weird camp of actually supporting the tax bill? Okay, so I've already talked about that. Now, there are also like a lot of weird and interesting things about the bill, which are ideologically scrambling, which are not clearly like right-wing stuff, really, which a lot of left-wing people really should not be so upset about, might actually be happy about if they could look at this in a kind of objective way. I'm not saying that we should be happy about the bill as overall. I mean, that's hard to know. It's complicated. Like, this stuff is really complicated. The bill does many things. And so getting a realistic and honest assessment of like its overall, value or quality is a super complicated, multidimensional kind of question to answer. I'm not even going to try to here. I'm just trying to lay out the bullet points that matter as far as I can tell. But so here are some of the really screwy things that you find. One is that, well, first of all, the deductible for the very poor was doubled from about 6,000 to 12,000. So that's a pretty left-wing thing. I mean, that's like a pretty, that's not like a brutal, regressive, right-wing class war attack. All right. I mean, as far as I can tell. So actually, I believe, as far as I've been able to tell, it is true that the number of poor people that no longer pay taxes will increase because of the doubling of the deductible for the very poor. Okay. So, I mean, I don't hear left-wing people kind of like saying, hey, that's actually not that bad. That's actually kind of cool. But it seems that it is. Again, how you kind of compare this to the other negative effects is a difficult task. But another really interesting and weird thing about the bill is that it also places it increases the taxes on university endowments. So like massive, super wealthy conservative institutions such as Harvard and Yale that are sitting on massive, massive endowments that are basically a product of, inherited, privilege, if you want to call it that. It's going to tax those more than we're currently taxing them. That seems to me to be also a pretty progressive thing that I'm generally sympathetic to. I think, the public should get a good chunk of that massive amount of wealth that is really just, propagating the interests of the most privileged people. So again, that's strangely progressive. I don't hear many people talking about that because I'm a lefty and most of my networks are lefty, but that seems relevant to me. Another point. There's going to be a new 20% excise tax on moving profits and goods to foreign entities. So this is a kind of clamping down on, multinational corporations and kind of, the increasingly unfettered, tendencies for international capital to kind of not give a shit about the people within the countries that they come from. So again, I mean, I don't think that all of these things make the bill good necessarily, but they are quite interesting little, folds, if you will. Little interesting, unexpected bits of the bill that at least complicate the idea that it's this, monolithic ball of, unambiguous evil. I don't know. Maybe it is, but I see a lot of things that aren't so bad, and the things that are bad, maybe they're bad. Like I do personally think that it's bad to, give super wealthy people and corporations, more and more, kind of like ways to escape, helping to share, the public bill. But I just don't really see how this is like kind of like world historical evil. Like Republicans, yeah, they want to give more money to rich people. I get it. That's like their politics. It's not that surprising. Of course Trump wants to do that. It's kind of to be expected. Is this like much worse than what I would have expected him to put through? I don't know. I don't feel that surprised by it, but I'm actually surprised by these weird kinds of good bits. Again, I don't think they make up for it, but it just seems to be, all I'll say is it seems to me to be at least slightly more complicated than kind of the moral panic around it suggests. I'm not defending it. I'm really not. I don't care to defend it. I'm just trying to do an exercise where I basically say how it all breaks down to me, how it all looks to me. And yeah, so those are basically the bullet points that I wanted to discuss because I don't hear many people kind of putting them all into one in one place like that. So yeah, I think it's probably a bad thing, but I don't see it as this kind of like world historical crisis. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. I think the United States is probably in a kind of world historical kind of crisis mode where it is, rapidly declining in the scheme of things, for sure. But is this like the, coup de grace, after which everything is going to rapidly plummet because of this bill? No, I mean, it's really, I just don't see it. That's not what I see. And so, I actually think like all of the hand-wringing of like, hyper morally panicky, lefties is like, it genuinely truly makes everything worse. I do think, because what happens is that we become, we become so accustomed to this like constant panic. Everything that happens is like the worst thing that could possibly happen, that we become inured to any new thing that might have like a unique signal of novel information about, the state of the world. So that's why like this might not be a very kind of ideologically punchy or clickbaity kind of overall explanation of the bill, but I'm just giving you my honest, kind of boring breakdown of it all, because I think that nowadays, that right now at this time, an honest and somewhat boring breakdown of what's going on is actually, quite rare and maybe even useful in some way that is maybe hard to fathom in the moment, because it doesn't feel very like punchy or powerful. But ultimately, personally, I'm making the wager that like if everyone can basically just stay as calm as possible and try to figure out what's truly going on and separate fact from fiction and not get pulled into like moralistic like herd behavior, if everyone can just simply prevent themselves from doing that, that's like the best we could possibly do, personally. So that's the end of my bit. If anyone has questions or wants to say something, I can answer now. Everything's terrible, broken up at times by a celebrity death. That's how it is now. Yeah, I agree that is very much the kind of like, that's like the status quo. That's the new normal. The new normal is that every day, everything that's happening is like, the worst thing that's ever happened. And then you're right, someone that we love dies, or someone that we, had a, positive relationship to when we were kids, their death comes, and then that's like the only moment of kind of like, even slightly, positive memorial types of attitudes emerge. Yeah, it's like the only ways that we're able to kind of access like public positivity is through like nostalgia, basically. Yeah, so I think we're in really, really strange times with contemporary, the contemporary media environment, and there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anxiety, and so it's like I feel that, and I'm not trying to like tell people to not. I'm not trying to dismiss that, but I just genuinely think there's a lot to gain by, basically doing everything we can to avoid kind of jumping into those like whirlpools of emotion and exaggeration, which it seems to me there are just plenty of. So, okay, that's my 2 cents for now. Thank you. I'm gonna wrap it up. See you later, everybody.